I was at a private tech dinner in Palo Alto recently, and the atmosphere felt different than usual. Normally, the air is thick with talk of alignment, agentic workflows, or the latest LLM benchmarks. But I found myself sitting across from a lead infrastructure architect for one of the major hyperscalers, someone responsible for the physical backbone of the AI revolution. He wasn't looking at code. Instead, he was obsessively scrolling through a high-resolution map of a decommissioned nuclear site in the Rust Belt. His eyes had this intense, almost predatory glow, the kind usually see in gold miners or oil speculators during a boom. He pointed to the window, toward the rolling hills where those iconic white wind turbines were spinning lazily in the afternoon breeze. He didn't look at them with the usual green pride, he looked at them with genuine contempt. "That's toy energy," he whispered, leaning in. "It's a pathology of scarcity. We're trying to build a god, and the world wants us to feed it with a straw." He explained that to his team, relying on the current grid, with its weather-dependent solar panels and fragile transmission lines, felt like civilizational suicide. They weren't interested in being carbon neutral on a spreadsheet anymore. They were interested in what he called energy superabundance. It was a jarring shift. For years, these Silicon Valley giants have been the darlings of the ESG movement, touting their solar farms and efficiency metrics. The green narrative of conservation and restraint is being replaced by a cold, thermodynamic Darwinism. They are realizing that the million GPU clusters of the near future require a baseload power that never sleeps, something far denser and more reliable than anything that 20th century grid can provide. What I saw that night wasn't just a business pivot, it was a sovereign awakening. These companies are tired of asking for permission from regulators who value safetyism over progress. They're preparing to cut the umbilical cord to the public grid entirely, building their own autonomous nuclear-powered city-states. It left me wondering, what happens to the rest of us when the architects of the future decide that the only way to keep the brain alive is to start playing by the rules of the past and start splitting atoms in their own backyards?
Wow, that is that's a brutal opening.
It was a brutal moment.
But it's dead on accurate. It perfectly encapsulates the quiet panic I'm seeing everywhere in the data center industry right now.
It's a panic. It felt more like a cold fury.
It's both.
Yeah.
Look, that architect wasn't being poetic or, trying to sound edgy. He was probably just looking at a power requirements spreadsheet for 2028 and realizing the math simply does not work with our existing infrastructure.
The math doesn't work with it. And that phrase he used, toy energy, that's really what stuck with me. Yeah. It's so aggressive. I mean, wind and solar power my house. They power entire countries in Europe on good days. Why that level of contempt? Why is he looking at a wind turbine and seeing a pathology?
Because he isn't trying to power a dishwasher, or a toaster. He is trying to power a singular, coherent thermodynamic state that we call training a model. And we really need to get a little technical for a second to understand his contempt. It really comes down to the physics of the chips themselves. What we're witnessing, what this whole deep dive is about, is the atomic-driven compute explosion. And the fuse that's lighting it is the GPU.
When we talk about these chips, the H100s, the Blackwells, whatever comes next, what are we actually talking about in terms of raw power consumption?
Okay, so think about the NVIDIA H100. It's pretty much the workhorse of the current AI boom.
Right. It's everywhere.
A single one of those little chips has what's called a thermal design power, or TDP, of up to 700 watts.
700 watts. I mean, my microwave is maybe 1,000, so it doesn't sound completely insane.
On its own, no. It's a high-end microwave or like a small space heater. But the thing is, these aren't running in isolation. They're racked up in massive clusters of 25,000, 50,000.
And the new ones are pushing 100,000 chips.
Soon, yes. Yeah. 100,000 chips, all running at once.
So, okay, do the math for us. 100,000 chips at 700 watts each.
That is 70 megawatts. Wow. 70 megawatts just for the silicon. That doesn't include the cooling, which is a massive power draw itself. It doesn't include the networking, the storage, all the auxiliary systems.
So what's the all-in number?
When you add all that in, a single training cluster is pushing well past the energy consumption of a mid-sized American city. This is the part that really matters. A city, it uses power in a predictable curve. It's high in the morning. When people wake up, it dips. It's high in the evening. Then it's low at night.
Sure, the daily rhythm.
That AI cluster runs at 100% load, flat out. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for weeks or even months at a time. No rhythm, just a constant, massive, unblinking demand.
And this is where the toy energy comment comes back in, right? Because the wind doesn't blow 247 and the sun doesn't shine at night.
This is all about reliability. And not just, it usually works reliability. We're talking about 5 nines reliability, 99.999%.
5 nines. So what does that mean in practice?
It means if you were running a training run that costs, say, $200 million in compute time.
Which is becoming standard.
Becoming standard, yes. And the wind dies down in West Texas for 20 minutes, or a big cloud bank moves over your solar array in Nevada, you have a catastrophe.
A catastrophe, if the power flickers at my house, my computer reboots, I might lose an unsaved document. It's annoying, but it's not a catastrophe.
Because your computer isn't maintaining a delicate, continuous process of adjusting trillions of parameters across thousands of chips all at the same time.
It's a coherent state, as you put it.
It's a coherent state. Think of it like a symphony. If the conductor vanishes for 20 minutes, you don't just pick up where you left off. The entire performance is ruined.
You lose the coherence.
You lose everything. You might have to scrub the whole run and restart from a checkpoint you saved days ago. You lose millions of dollars in an instant. More importantly, you lose time in a race where being second means you lose everything.
So that architect calls wind toy energy. Because you cannot build a reliable superintelligence on an intermittent fuel source.
It's a fundamental mismatch of physics. You need what the energy industry calls firm power.
Firm power. That implies density. It implies control.
It implies total control.
Yeah.
And this really brings us to the first big piece of our analysis today, the thermodynamic reality of intelligence. We have to, we have to stop thinking of AI as just software running in the cloud.
It's not abstract.
It's not abstract at all. It is a physical machine that turns electricity into thought. And the efficiency of that conversion, the quality of that thought, depends entirely on the density and reliability of the fuel you feed it.
There was a fascinating account I read in preparation for this about Dr. Eris Thorne. She's a name people might recognize. For decades, she was a huge proponent of the soft path energy transition. Very anti-nuclear, very pro-renewables.
Absolutely, Dr. Thorne. Her transformation is emblematic of this entire shift we're talking about. She's bet her career, her entire life's work, arguing that we should adapt our consumption to the rhythms of nature.
Right. Use energy when the sun shines, conserve when it doesn't. Live within our means.
That was the whole philosophy. A kind of, ecological modesty.
Right. But then she visited a data center. I think it was somewhere in the Pacific Northwest.
And that visit changed everything for her.
The description of that visit was so visceral. She wasn't looking at a spreadsheet or an academic paper. She was standing in the hot aisle of a GPU cluster.
I've been in those aisles. It's a physical experience.
She described watching the physical power meters on the rack spiking as the model inside began to reason, as it performed these complex inference tasks. And in that moment, she said she felt a moment of clarity that was almost terrifying.
She saw the beast. She finally saw the scale of what they were trying to build. She realized that intelligence, in a computational sense, is an incredibly energy-hungry process.
She had this great quote. She compared trying to power that GPU cluster with wind and solar to trying to power a space shuttle with a sail.
Perfect.
It wasn't just that it was hard or inefficient. She realized the physics were fundamentally mismatched. She started using this term that I think is so important. The thermodynamic imperative.
That concept, the thermodynamic imperative, is crucial to all of this. It's the core realization.
Exactly.
Thorne realized that if we, as a species, want to solve the really hard problems, climate change, curing cancer, cracking nuclear fusion, we need AI.
Yeah.
We need that massive computational brain to see patterns we can't.
Okay.
And this was her terrifying clarity. To build that brain, we cannot be energy foragers anymore.
Energy foragers.
Yeah, that's what renewables are, fundamentally. We're foraging for jewels that happen to be passing by on the wind or in the sunlight. We can't scrounge for energy anymore. We have become energy creators. We need the primal, dense energy of the strong nuclear force. We need fission.
It's a complete inversion of the entire environmental movement's logic for the last 50 years.
A total 180.
She's arguing that the most green thing we can do, the most pro-human, pro-planet thing we can do, is to stop rationing energy and start maximizing it.
Right.
She said something that really struck me. I think I wrote it down. She said, "We're trying to build a brain powerful enough to save the planet, and we are starving it."
Right.
And that is the crux of the entire conflict. It's the pathology of scarcity versus the new mindset of energy superabundance.
Scarcity versus abundance.
The whole environmental movement of the last 40 years has been about doing less with less. Efficiency, conservation, smaller footprints.
Right. Turn off the lights when you leave the room.
Exactly. But the AI movement is about doing more with more. They want infinite compute, which requires functionally infinite energy. And the only way to get anywhere near that without, burning the atmosphere to a crisp is nuclear fission. Okay, so this seems obvious then. If nuclear is the answer, it's dense, it's firm, it's carbon-free, why aren't we just plugging these data centers into the existing grid?
Wow.
I mean, we have nuclear plants. We have a grid. Why was that architect talking about building sovereign city-states? Why the need to go off-grid?
Because the grid is broken.
Well,
And not just physically, in the sense of old wires and transformers, but bureaucratically. It's a 20th century system facing a 22nd century problem.
and this is where the solution comes in.
This brings us to the rise of the SMR and what they're calling the sovereign node.
SMR, Small Modular Reactor. I feel like we hear this acronym constantly now, but what does it actually look like? Is it just a tiny version of those giant cooling towers we see on TV?
The thing you see on TV, that's the cathedral model of nuclear.
The cathedral model.
Massive, bespoke, one-off construction projects that take, 20 years to build and cost tens of billions of dollars. Each one is a unique nightmare of logistics and concrete.
Okay, so what's the SMR model?
SMRs are the iPhone model.
The iPhone model.
They are factory fabricated. You don't build them on site. You manufacture them on an assembly line. They come off the line, you put them on a heavy haul truck or a train, and you ship them directly to the site where you need the power.
It's like buying a mobile home versus building a custom house from scratch.
And because of that, the quality control is higher, the costs are lower, and the build time is a fraction of what it used to be. But it's not just the size, the technology inside is fundamentally different.
So
many of these new designs, like the ones from companies like Oklo or Kairos Power that are partnering with the tech giants, they don't use high-pressure water as a coolant.
Which is what traditional reactors use.
And that high-pressure system is what requires those enormous, expensive concrete containment domes to contain a potential steam explosion. These new SMRs use things like liquid metal, like sodium, or molten salts.
And why is that better?
They operate at atmospheric pressure. So you physically cannot have a high-pressure steam explosion. You don't need the giant dome. They also run on a different kind of fuel called HAEU, high-assay, low-enriched uranium.
Okay, what does that mean for safety?
It means they're designed to be walk-away safe. It's a term of art. If the power cuts out, if all the human operators vanish, the fundamental physics of the fuel and the coolant naturally shut the reaction down. No buttons to push, no pumps needed to circulate water. Gravity and thermodynamics do the safety work for you.
Okay, so the tech is it's a generational leap forward. It's safer, it's smaller, it's factory built. But the architect wasn't just talking about better tech, he was talking about cutting the cord. He called relying on the grid civilizational suicide. That's not a technical problem, that's a systems problem.
And this is where we really get into the story of Julian. It's a story that perfectly illustrates why these tech giants are giving up on the entire public utility system.
Julian, this is the lead engineer from that Palo Alto dinner story.
That's the one. The story, as I've heard it, is that Julian was a lead engineer running a lab that had developed a breakthrough neural architecture.
Okay.
They had the chips, they had the data, they were ready to train a model that could potentially rival or even California grid.
And he called it a school zone.
Exactly. He said it was like having a Ferrari and being forced to drive it in a school zone.
I can imagine the frustration.
It was more than frustration. Every time they tried to ramp up the training run, every single time they tried to pull the necessary megawatts to really let the model learn, the local utility would slam on the brakes.
And they just cut them off.
They'd get official notices about grid stability. They'd get hit with these insane peak load financial penalties. They were told, flat out, that they simply couldn't draw that much power during the day because the transmission lines,
the actual physical wires.
The wires themselves, which were built in the 1970s, literally couldn't handle the heat. They would sag and risk shorting out.
You have the fire of Prometheus in your server rack, and you can't light it because the extension cord is too thin.
It destroyed their timeline. And as we said, in the AI race, speed is everything. It's the only thing. So Julian's team made a radical pivot.
They gave up on the utility.
They stopped looking for a better utility contract. They realized the utility was the enemy. It was the bottleneck. So they moved the entire operation to a sovereign node model.
So it sounds almost secessionist.
It is, in a way. It's the idea of physical closure. You buy a big plot of land somewhere remote, the high desert, rural Appalachia, wherever. You drop an SMR or whole battery of SMRs right there on the property.
And you connect it directly to the data center.
Directly. You run a fat cable from the reactor to the server racks. There's no transmission line to the outside world. There's no connection to the public grid. You are an island, an energy autarky.
So you completely bypass the regulations. You get to skip the years-long waiting list for a grid connection.
You bypass everything. You are no longer asking permission from the Department of Energy or the State Utility Commission or anyone else to use power. You are generating it yourself behind the meter.
And this is happening now. This isn't theoretical.
This is exactly what Amazon is doing with that Talon Energy deal at the Susquehanna nuclear plant in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
They're not buying power over the grid. They bought the data center right next to the reactor so they can plug directly into the bus bar. It's a private wire.
Microsoft restarting 3 Mile Island.
It's the exact same logic.
Yeah.
They're taking Unit 1, which has been sitting dormant for years, and turning it back on exclusively for their data centers. They are creating a closed loop, a city-state of compute powered by its own private sun.
It really does sound like they're seceding from the energy grid.
They are creating what Julian called power sovereignty. His realization, and the realization of Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, is that innovation is a survival mechanism. If the organism, the AI company, cannot get the nutrients it needs from its environment, the grid,
it evolves to create its own.
It evolves to create its own. If the grid won't evolve, the future simply builds its own grid inside the walls of its fortress.
Which, I mean, this brings up a massive, massive question. I was looking at the numbers on this, and they are genuinely depressing. The example of the Connecticut Yankee plant in the 1960s.
Right. Connecticut Yankee, a perfect example. Construction started in 63. It went online in 68. It took 5 years to build.
5 years.
5 years. And it cost about $1 billion in today's money. It was on time and on budget. We were good at this. We knew how to do it.
And you compare that to the recent Vocal plant in Georgia.
The Vocal units 3 and 4. It's a horror story. They took 14 years to build. 14. And they cost over $30 billion.
$30 billion.
More than double the original estimate. We went from building cheap, fast, clean energy infrastructure to building the most expensive, slowest infrastructure projects on Earth.
How does that happen? How does a civilization get worse at building things? I mean, usually technology makes things cheaper and faster over time.
It wasn't the technology that failed. It was the regulatory state around the technology. The sources point to a very specific mechanism of paralysis, and it's driven by 2 little acronyms, LRIA and LNT.
Okay, down. LRI. It stands for as low as reasonably achievable.
Correct.
That's right. It sounds perfectly reasonable. I want radiation to be low. I want the safety measures to be achievable. Why is this the villain of the story?
It sounds completely benign, but in practice, it became what's known as a ratchet effect. It's a one-way street to infinite cost. Let's say in 1975, the best sensor you have can detect radiation at a level of, say, 100 parts per billion. So the regulations say, okay, you must keep emissions below that level.
Cool.
But then technology improves. In 1985, you invent a new sensor that's much more sensitive. It can detect 1 part per billion.
Progress. We're better at measuring things.
But under the LRA principle, the regulator looks at that new sensor and says, well, since it is now reasonably achievable to detect and remove that 1 part per billion, you must now do it.
So the goalposts for safety move every single time we invent a better ruler.
But the standard for what was considered safe tightened, not because the actual health risk changed at all, but simply because our measurement tools got better.
It completely decoupled safety from actual health outcomes.
We ended up spending billions and billions of dollars shielding against radiation levels that were already thousands of times lower than the dose you get from a cross-country flight or from just living in Denver for a year. We did it just because we could.
And this connects to the other acronym, LNT.
Yes, LNT, the linear no-threshold model. This is the assumption that the danger line for radiation goes straight down to 0, that any radiation, no matter how small, is harmful.
But that's not biologically true, is it?
The world is naturally radioactive. You are radioactive right now. Bananas are samously radioactive because they contain potassium-40.
I've heard that.
Granite countertops are radioactive. If you applied the strict LARA and LNT standards that we apply to a nuclear plant to your kitchen,
you'd have to wear a hazmat suit to make a sandwich.
Good. But we applied these impossibly strict unscientific standards to one specific industry, and it drove costs into the stratosphere. It turned a feat of engineering into an exercise in paperwork.
This brings us to the story of Evelyn. For me, this was the most heartbreaking part of the research.
Evelyn's story is the human face of this stagnation. It's what happens when a system becomes paralyzed.
She was a veteran inspector for the NRC, right? The Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
For 30 years, she spent her entire career believing she was one of the good guys. You know, she was the shield, the thin line protecting the public from the glowing green goo of a meltdown.
She followed the rule book to the absolute letter.
She did. She was defined by the rule book. But the story describes this moment late in her career where she was reviewing the blueprints for one of these new SMRs we just talked about.
A design that's walk-away safe.
Right. A design that, as we discussed, is physically incapable of melting down. The laws of physics prevent it. And she looked at this inherently safe design, and then she looked at the mountain of paperwork on her desk.
All the regulations she had to enforce.
Requirements for active cooling pumps, for backup diesel generators, for redundant valve checks on systems that didn't even exist in the new design. And she realized none of it applied.
The rules were written for a different machine from a different century.
It was worse than that. She had a moment of terrible clarity, just like Dr. Thorne. She realized the rules were actively preventing the better, safer machine from ever being built.
That safetyism, as the architect called it, had morphed into paralysis.
Total paralysis. By making it impossible to build new, safer plants. She realized she had inadvertently been responsible for keeping the old, less safe coal and gas plants running for decades longer than they should have.
Wow.
She saw the young physicists, the brightest minds of their generation, leaving the field entirely because they didn't want to spend their lives filling out compliance forms for valves that didn't need to exist.
That shift in her perspective, that safe isn't always good if it completely stops progress, that's so powerful. And it led her to start looking at the e-check movement differently.
Right. The effective accelerationists. She had always seen them as, reckless cowboys, tech bros who wanted to move fast and break things.
But she started to see them differently.
She started seeing them as a rescue mission. She realized that the antidote to the great stagnation wasn't more caution. It wasn't another committee. It was a culture of courage, a willingness to actually build things again.
Moving from being anti-safety to being pro-progress.
A critical distinction. And it seems like that culture, that sense of urgency, is finally trickling up to the White House and to Congress. That regulatory wall is finally starting to crack.
It seems like it's crumbling based on the timeline.
We've seen a massive, almost unbelievable shift just in the last 2 years. You had the ADVANCE Act pass in July of 2024.
A bipartisan bill, which is a miracle in itself.
A true miracle.
Yeah.
And it literally changed the NRC's mission statement. For the first time, it directed them to not just restrict nuclear energy, but to facilitate its development.
That's a huge philosophical change.
It's everything. And then you had the series of executive orders in May of 2025 under the new administration.
The Stargate project proposals.
Exactly. We are suddenly talking about $500 billion federal investments in the nuclear supply chain. We're talking about streamlining the licensing process for new reactors from 5 or 10 years down to 18 months.
The government is trying to catch up.
They're scrambling. They finally realized that if they don't get out of the way, the tech companies will just build their own energy systems and leave the public grid and the public behind. They're trying to catch up to the reality of the AI demand curve.
Okay. We have the demand, this insatiable hunger from AI. We have the fuel uranium and the new SMR tech. And now finally, we have the political will to clear the path.
All the pieces are aligning.
So if we zoom out, if we look forward past the spreadsheets and the politics, where does this actually take us as a civilization? The research gets pretty cosmic here. It brings up the Kardashev scale.
This is where we stop talking about megawatts and start talking about the destiny of a species. The Kardashev scale is a way of measuring a civilization's maturity.
Not by its philosophy or its art,
but by its energy budget. How much power can it command? At the end of the day, that's the only metric that matters on a cosmic scale.
So walk us through the levels. What's a Type I civilization?
A Type I civilization is a planetary one. It has harnessed all of the energy that is available on its home planet. That means all the solar energy that falls on it, all the geothermal, and crucially, all the atomic energy locked in its crust. It controls the planetary energy budget.
And where are we right now on that scale?
We are about a Type 0.7.
0.7.
We're basically toddlers playing with matches. We are still primarily burning dead plant fossil fuels. We're just beginning to scavenge for wind and solar. We have not yet truly mastered the power of the atom.
But this atomic-driven compute explosion that we're talking about, that's the ladder up.
It is the primary mechanism of ascent. The theory is that AI is the catalyst. AI is the tool that allows us to design better fusion reactors, to optimize fission, to manage grids of unimaginable complexity.
So we're converting ordered energy into ordered information?
We are converting the ordered energy of a uranium atom into the ordered information of intelligence. And that creates a virtuous cycle, an accelerating feedback loop that allows us to climb the scale.
There was a projection in the research that I found wildly optimistic but fascinating. The year 2271.
The simulations suggest that if we fully embrace this nuclear transition, if we really do stop playing with toy energy and go all in on building out SMRs, we could reach full Type I status by the year 2271.
Masters of our planet's energy.
And that has huge economic implications. The idea of the uranium standard.
Right.
In a world where compute is the most valuable resource and energy is the absolute bottleneck for creating more compute, then the densest form of energy becomes the ultimate store of value.
And that's uranium.
It's uranium. A single fuel pellet the size of a gummy bear has as much potential energy as a literal ton of coal. In the AI era, uranium contracts, the right to that condensed power, could become the new gold standard. It becomes the collateral for the future.
It's a heady, optimistic vision, but we have to ground this again. We started this conversation talking about sovereign nodes and city-states,
right?
And that sounds great for the AI companies inside the walls. But the research talked about a triangular tension.
This is the dark side of the acceleration. This is what could go wrong. The triangle is the relationship between the corporation, the government, and the community.
The people who actually live near these new plants.
Exactly. And right now, that triangle is dangerously out of balance. The corporation has all the capital and momentum. The government's regulatory power is shrinking. And the community is at risk of getting squeezed.
Yes. What's the specific problem?
The most immediate one is the offtake agreement problem.
Yeah.
So back to the grandmother in Pennsylvania who lives near the Susquehanna plant.
Yeah.
For decades, that plant put cheap, reliable, zero-carbon electricity onto the public grid. It kept her electric rates low. It kept her lights on during winter storms when the gas plants couldn't get fuel. It was a public good.
But now Amazon effectively buys the plant's output.
Amazon buys the power behind the meter. Those electrons never hit the public grid. They go straight from the reactor into Amazon's GPUs to power chatbots.
So what happens to the public grid?
The public grid loses that massive source of baseload power. The local utility has to replace it. And what do they replace it with? Usually natural gas, which is volatile in price and emits carbon, or intermittent renewables, which need expensive battery backups.
So the grandmother's electric bill goes up so a chatbot can run faster.
That is the direct, unavoidable consequence. Yes. We are risking a bifurcation of our energy society, a two-tiered system.
Yeah.
You'll have the AI city-states inside the walls, enjoying what you could call premium, platinum-tier energy. It's 99.999% uptime, nuclear-powered, completely immune to weather or geopolitics.
And then there's everyone else.
And then you have the general public outside the walls, dealing with economy-tier energy. It's intermittent, it's more expensive, and it's fragile.
It's a feudalism of electrons.
A new energy aristocracy. And it's not just about electricity, it's also about water.
The cooling needs.
These reactors and the data centers they power are incredibly thirsty. They evaporate millions and millions of gallons of water for cooling. If you drop a sovereign node in the middle of the Arizona desert or West Texas,
you are in direct competition with local farmers and cities for a dwindling aquifer.
It's a zero-sum game for the most essential resource there is. That feels like a powder keg waiting to explode.
And
if the tech giants aren't incredibly careful, if they treat these host communities as just obstacles to be managed rather than as true partners, we're going to see a massive backlash.
A new wave of anti-nuclear sentiment.
A backlash that could derail this whole renaissance before it even gets started. This is why we need what the sources call nuclear knowledge management. We need new forms of governance. Because if the federal government is stepping back and letting these companies build their own private suns, someone has to make sure the radiation and the economic fallout doesn't burn the neighbors.
It's such a delicate path. We're walking this tightrope between the great stagnation on one side, where we build nothing and just slowly decline,
and this kind of techno-feudalism on the other, where we build these incredible gods in the machine, but leave most of humanity behind.
But the alternative is worse.
The alternative is staying where we are. And as that architect said at the dinner, the current path is civilizational suicide. We need the intelligence. We desperately need the energy. We need to figure out how to distribute the benefits of the future so it doesn't just belong to the people who own the servers.
So we have gone from a dinner table conversation in Palo Alto through the fundamental physics of a GPU, the tragedy of a well-meaning regulator, all the way to the Kardashev scale and the heat death of the universe, and back down to the water table in Arizona. It is a massive, fundamental shift.
It is the shift of our lifetime.
Yeah.
We are watching, in real time, the transition from an age of scarcity to a potential age of superabundance. But transitions are always messy. They break things. They create new winners and new losers.
The sovereign node. That image is really going to stick with me. A nuclear-powered fortress of compute out in the high desert, humming away, answering to no one but the laws of thermodynamics. It feels like we are watching the physical separation of the future from the past. The architects of intelligence are no longer asking for permission to plug into our wall sockets. They are building their own suns. The question isn't whether they will succeed. The money and the physics suggest they will, but whether the rest of civilization will be invited inside the city walls when they do.
That is the defining question of the next 50 years.